chance to post some questions in the chat or raise your hands while we have Senator Comerford here with us. I do want to start this by asking you, Senator, we know that one of the things that the caucus tries to do, and a lot of us try to do as well, is connect food issues with other important issues like healthcare, like transportation, like land use. The legislature seems to go in waves with the topics that it's focused on. What do you see as key issues for the legislature right now, and how would you best see us leveraging that interest to get food system issues included in those considerations?
Really good question. So I do think that, for example, in the last, I'm just going to speak now for the Senate because I don't want to speak for the House priorities just because our House colleagues are driving their own good agenda. I do think that the Senate is focused a great deal on equity currently. There is a lens of equity that is driving a lot of what we're doing. For example, we just passed something called the Mental Health ABC Act. And equity was a driving force there, regional equity, and then of course, equity across race, ethnicity, class lines. And I think insofar as the work, of course, is common cause with food access, food justice, that is a strong intersecting point for us. And I do think that the Senate took very seriously the charge of ARPA to provoke, spike, drive an equitable recovery from COVID, from the pandemic that we're still in the middle of. And so I do think that that as a guiding principle in the narrative that we have as advocates for food justice, food system health is really critical. I also think that insofar as the existential of climate change is with us at all times, and here thanks to Mike Barrett, right, who's one of the guiding forces in the Senate on climate related work, I do think that recognizing the ties between the health of a food system and the health of our climate is also something that is quite resonant, I find, in the body, right? I don't think if it weren't so resonant, we wouldn't have passed, and Marty, I see Marty's on, I don't think we would have passed healthy soils in an ECDEV bill, and I don't think we would be talking about sequestration, so liberally, and the role of the sort of common cause between healthy farms and healthy climate. So those are two intersecting points that I do think are quite present for us.
And then not to put you on the spot, but thinking about ARPA 2, ARPA 1, there was a lot of stuff in there, in part thanks to you, around healthcare and quite a bit around mental health care as well. So there was that sort of focus for ARPA 1. Is there talk about what ARPA 2, is there a theme?
There hasn't been a theme that I've been privy to. I am not on Ways and Means, as you know, so there may be good conversations that I'm just not in. But I do know that we hope for an ARPA. So this is what I hear, right? Things can change, subject to change. I do know that there is a robust interest for an ARPA 2, likely before the fiscal year 23 budget, which would make it super soon. I also know that we're absolutely considering a SUP. As you guys know, SUPs happen all the time, supplemental budgets. So that's nothing unusual here. And then of course, there'll be the 23. So there's no time to waste before making the cases for the gains that we still have to make on in terms of capital spending and program related spending. And there'll be hopefully several bites at the proverbial apple between now and July.
Great, thanks. I'll remind folks to put questions in the chat. There's one here, Senator, a question about how or where we should direct folks when they want to provide input. What's the best point of contact for individuals and for organizations?
Super smart question. I'm not evading this, Hannah. I think it depends on what the issue is. So for example, if there is a concerted statewide effort to move the needle on something, then I think directing constituents to or partners to that effort would be great. right, to fuel something. Say, for example, higher percentages in mass grown out of MIFAP or something like that. But I think globally, again, this is my premise, that we work better when we hear from you. I think globally, having people contact their local representatives and senators with, hey, my priority is food systems. Or, you know, if they have a distinct priority, is always a good idea. Because, you know, you guys, I used to teach lobbying. And I did it for years and years and years from different jobs, right? And I was always, you know, thinking about ways in which we, as legislators, and I know I see Barbara here, so Barbara knows this too. You know, how to reach legislators most effectively. And I used to say things like, you know, one call can make the difference. An in-person visit is, you know, like mind-blowing. 5 emails, 2 letters. These are real game changers. And I will tell you now, 3 years in, that I'm so glad I wasn't wrong after I was doing all those trainings. It is completely true that especially constituents cut through and can change the direction of an office. It's just completely true. Conversations happen in the hallways. Hey, did you get that blast? They're talking about these things. Do you know what these things are? Now they happen more by texts, right? Because we're less and less in the building. Hopefully we're coming back soon, but so it's real. So when you direct people locally, they feel it locally and they do want to connect. It's one of the reasons there's 153 members of the Food System Caucus, right? Because you've told us that it's important to you.
So Leran asked a question similar to what I was going to ask. You just talked about things that have been effective, but I'm also curious, are there places where you wish advocates were speaking up more? Are there things that you think are missed opportunities that advocates could be helping to move the needle more on?
I don't think missed opportunities, Winton and Leran. I think, and this was always a struggle for me, the trick with the legislature is to catch us at the right moment. And again, many of you know this, but one of the reasons we're talking today, I think, so much about gearing up for ARPA 2 and the SUP and the budget is that work's going to happen now, right? We're going to have what's called a consensus revenue set of hearings where we'll understand how much money we have to spend. And then the administration will put forward a budget, and then the House and then the Senate. And, you know, the train leaves the station now, right now. And so the tragedy is always not having enough time to affect change. It's always better to get in. So even getting in now to talk about, you know, a budget letter, which, you know, some of us in the Senate won't really send until maybe February or maybe early March, depending on where we are in the cycle. That's great because, you know, if we get too far in, we'll have made promises to other constituencies, and then we won't be able to do it justice. So that's always the problem, is timing and not allowing enough timing to be effective.
Another interesting question in here about the idea of collaborations between different agencies and how that could be used to strengthen food system work, particularly if there's funding that can be drawn from different agencies. The person was asking in particular about Department of Labor and the Rehab Service Administration. And if you see opportunities for those kinds of connections. I recognize this is more of an administration question than a legislative question, but would be interested in your perspective.
Christine asks a really good question. I don't have a great specific answer to the great collaboration you're suggesting here, Christine. But I do think, here's what I do think, is that what I've seen, again, in 3 years, so I've not been here for longer than that, but I do think that when advocates are able to build partnerships across sort of unique constituencies and elevate a constituency that perhaps we wouldn't have as legislators thought had this common cause with food systems, it's exceedingly important. It's like light bulbs go off and we get super excited, right? Because if we care about food systems and we always want to expand the state's access to food, understanding different constituencies is always a useful way for just to make sure that we're always thinking, God, everybody needs this. And if everybody needs it, then it's easy to have it at the top of priority lists. So sorry, I don't have experience in this, the collaboration. So
just make sure everyone's talking about food. So one last question. I recognize it's after 10:30 and I promised you you'd be done, is from Stephen, and I've heard this from other folks as well. ARPA is providing a big infusion of resources right to where it's needed most, but it's going to run out. All the money has to be spent by 2027. And so what happens then?
Yeah, really good question. I think what happens then is, will start now, right? By really us understanding as legislators and you understanding with us, like forming a common understanding of what we hope to be the trajectory of investment on the part of the Commonwealth on your priority issues.
All right, well, let's just leave it.
Oh, the perils of Zoom. The trick of ARPA is that there is reticence on the part of legislators to set baselines that we won't be able to universally meet going forward, right? That's one of the reasons why a lot of the ARPA funding, like for example, I spent a lot of time on the public health side of the ARPA funding. A lot of the ARPA funding is one-time related so that we can jumpstart this equitable recovery. And I think we have to keep an eye on articulating the one-timeness, right? The stuff like FSIG, capital projects that we can jumpstart now, and it's a win-win, it's a recovery win, and it's a farm win, or a food system win. And I think we have to understand what just sustainability looks like going forward. And we have to articulate both of those so that the legislature understands, okay, yeah, they get that these are spiked levels, especially due to COVID. And we understand from advocates and then from folks inside who are wanting to lift up these priorities, we understand what the right arc of sustained spending looks like. And we can have that conversation, a very nuanced conversation about the difference between one-time capital recovery funds and sustaining a Commonwealth commitment to food security. And I think if we can do that well, then folks won't be like, oh my God, they're going to think we have to do these levels all the time. And if we give them that fear, they're going to be like, oh, nope, we can't do that. And I get that, right? Because the budget has hundreds of millions of dollars of potential need, and we'll only spend, a tiny fraction of that in an annual budget. And so we don't want to overpromise. We don't want to put ourselves into peril and squeeze out other things that all of us care about. Everything from transportation to local aid to education, or housing. So, we want to figure out the right balance in there, the right intersection for what piece of the pie food systems should get. So that's part of it. So we have to have a really sharp answer as we go into ARPA 2. This is what we want, and we want this kind of spiked, capital one-time funding, and this is what we're going to expect from you, legislature, this year and next year and the year after.
Well, thank you so much, Senator. I hope you can picture the applause you'd be getting right now from everybody in the room if we were in the hotel like we were hoping to be, and not just for this presentation, but just for all of the work that you've done over the last 3 years and before that for the food system in the Commonwealth. So thank you again. And we all look forward to working with you and your colleagues even more.
Well, I'm here, think about 153 people behind me, right? Who are legislators who care about this, including leadership. I'll speak only again for the Senate, but Senate leadership loves food system work, right? So there's a lot of good in the legislature, and then your work makes all the difference, right? Any gain we've made, you should get the applause from 153 of us. So I'll leave you to it, and grateful that I spent time with you.
Thanks again, Senator. With that, we're going to take some time to talk about some priorities for advocacy organizations, and we're going to start with the collaborative. Becca, if you could, there you go. Thank you. So we're going to talk about some bills pretty briefly. The Senator just talked about a lot of the bills that are the collaborative's priorities as well. So the first one, she mentioned this at the top, is an omnibus bill that she filed and Representative Blais filed on the House side. There's about 15 different sections of this bill that are all related to food system issues, primarily farmers, obviously. This would create a circuit rider program at MDAR, have a staff person whose role was to work with farmers, not in a regulatory capacity, but to help farmers understand the department, regulations, grant programs, and things like that, something that was first recommended in the food system plan 6 years ago. It allows non-contiguous parcels to be taxed at 61A rates. This is a big issue with farms that are managing many different small parcels. And not getting the benefit of the tax reduction that's intended for farmers. And it would also direct the Emergency Management Agency to think more about food production and disaster planning. We saw last year throughout the crisis that there were plans in place for how to use how to distribute food, but no real accounting for the fact that we produce a lot of food here in Massachusetts as well. And how do we make sure that we boost that production during crises and that we make sure that food gets to people where it's most needed. Next slide, please. An act relative to an agricultural healthy incentives program. This is a bill that's been around for several sessions now. This would essentially encode the HIP program into statute. And would establish a fund where resources could be placed for donations and appropriations. The program is operating, obviously, but by having it in law, it would be much harder for it to later go away if there was an administration that wasn't particularly supportive of the program. So we continue to push for this bill as well. Next one. The Senator also talked about this bill, the food donations bill. We know that two of the big obstacles to folks donating edible food is concerns about being sued if something goes wrong with the food that's been donated, and also that for some folks, particularly farmers, you can't get a tax break for that donation. So this bill would do both of those things, would relieve the liability concerns, and would establish a tax credit to help farmers manage, because there are obviously costs to donating food as well. And so this would make it worthwhile for farmers to make those donations. These are two bills that are intended to help strengthen the state's slaughter capacity and meat processing capacity. As demand has increased in the state, farmers have had to travel farther and farther with their livestock to get them processed. And that obviously is not good for the environment. It's not good for the local economy. And it ends up being more expensive for both farmers and consumers. Ultimately, we want to see more small processors around the state. And this bill would instruct the state to develop a program that would make that happen. An act supporting the Commonwealth's food system comes from the idea that there needs to be more coordination among agencies that work on food. There is the Food Policy Council. There was the governor's task force on food security that was stood up last year. And so there's an understanding at the state level that there needs to be a greater level of coordination, and some agencies are really doing that, but it's not staffed in any way. And so this bill would establish a state food system coordinator position that would work among agencies to make sure that they are supporting each other, that they're not duplicating where it's not necessary, identifying gaps in services, and ultimately trying to make sure that the state's goals around food system issues are supported by all the agencies working together in coordination. And an act promoting equity in agriculture, I am going to turn it over to my colleague Norris. This bill is one that he's been focused on with the Equity Network. Norris, are you with us?
I am. Thanks, Winton. Hello, everyone. I'm Norris Guscott, the Mass Food System Collaborative's Equity Policy Networks Manager. In this role, I'm building, engaging, and empowering a network of BIPOC farmers, food equity leaders, and the organizations that represent and support them for advocacy related to issues like jobs and education and land access. Equity is the key here. And it's now my pleasure to tell you a little bit about H860, the meat and potatoes. And as always, many thanks to Senator Comerford, who's on the line, and Rep. Blay for, eternally championing the bill, and all supporters of the bill. At this moment, it's still in the Joint Committee on Environment, Natural Resources, and Agriculture, but we're pretty confident it's going to be voted out in favor. Knock on wood. So inequity in agriculture impacts and I'll try to, give you the meat and potatoes of this. Inequity in agriculture impacts BIPOC communities across the Commonwealth, and it has a bunch of ripple effects. BIPOC farmers make up 2% of farmers statewide. And with that, think of all the missed jobs and local produce and economic activity. There are limited land access and ag training initiatives for BIPOC farmers. Going back to the theme of equity and access there, BIPOC communities suffer food-related disease at 2 to 3 times the normal rate, as fresh, culturally relevant produce still struggles to get their way into BIPOC communities. And there's very limited data at this intersection of agriculture access and the larger mass food system as a whole. So it takes a bunch of different forms, and we see that it correlates with access. And this is more or less what S502 H860 tends to address. So it's going to focus on the root causes of ag inequity. And I know, and part of that is, creating a commission, but it's just not another commission, right? So just that commission in itself represents an opportunity for MDAR to stake build and with BIPOC farmers and communities, to solidify that the trust that's been going on for, that's been going back some years, and doing this in an equitable and collaborative manner, which is also important on many levels to build trust. The commission itself is going to comprise BIPOC leaders from across the state, and who are going to be pretty well seasoned and have been doing this work for decades. So they're going to be able to hit the ground and running. It's not going to be a reinventing of the wheel. And they're going to be able to dive into things like equity recommendations pertaining to investments, existing laws and regs. Going back again, MDAR and the state as a whole have been great partners historically, and this is going to build on that. Data collection, going back to that sticky issue of there's not much data or data that we can use to be innovative in some of the solutions that's happening in the ag world. And again, this is a no-cost bill, and addresses areas very effectively in a way that no bill prior has. So again, we truly believe this bill is going to begin to address some of the root causes of ag inequity in our state, and build on the work that's already been done with MDAR. And it's for that reason that if you haven't supported it or you haven't checked it out, please go do so now. And again, that ends my little report here. But again, thank you to all the supporters of the bill. Senator Comerford, Rep. Blay, you're amazing. And yeah, it's Winton.
Excellent. Thank you, Norris. Next slide, Becca. I want to talk briefly about budgets just to orient folks, and Senator Comerford talked about this a little bit, so I'll get through it quickly. The annual operating budget, the process starts very soon. The governor will release his budget in January. The House version will be in April, and the Senate version will be in May. This is where they set the line item amounts for all the programs that we care about, like HIP and MEFAP and the buy locals, Project Bread's projects, the food source hotline and the child nutrition outreach program, and others. And so now is the time for us to be thinking about what we want to ask for in the operating budget. The HIP working group did settle on a $20 million ask for fiscal year 23. I don't know if any of the others have been set yet, but we'll be hearing more from advocates over the next couple of months as we set request amounts for all of these other programs. The ARPA budget, we were pleased with some things, not with others. In the ARPA budget in the first round, obviously, we're still waiting to see what the governor is going to do with it. The food security line was strong, but with a lot of earmarks that left very little money for farmers. We're hoping to be able to resolve that in round 2. Conservation programs, we were pleased that the original language of the conservation programs did refer to working lands and urban agriculture, but didn't include the Department of Ag Resources as one of the players. We were pleased to be able to get that added. And we were pleased to be able to make sure that farmers and food system workers were included in the line that relates to premium pay for folks who were considered essential workers at the beginning of the crisis. And $4 million for ag fairs, which is a great way of helping support farmers and education around the food system. And then finally, the capital budget. And the capital budget is the governor's own budget that he gets to spend money that has been authorized by earlier bond bills. In the food systems case, primarily, it's the environmental bond bills that are passed every 4 years. So the governor releases his spending plan every May. This includes all of the funding for MDAR grant programs, which have been significantly oversubscribed for many years, and we're always trying to get those amounts increased. The amounts for the food trust every year. He did include $15 million for the FSIG program this year, and we hope that will continue. And also one-off projects get support from the capital budget. And so the farmland planning process that's going on now was supported with the fiscal 22 capital budget. So, you know, there's always opportunities to be advocating around budget issues. And with these 3 in play all at the beginning of the new year, there's going to be lots of opportunities for advocacy. So please keep an eye on social media and the Collaborative's newsletter for opportunities about all of these budgets. I think that's my last slide. So I'm going to turn it over now to Laura Sylvester from the Food Bank of Western Mass. And Laura, you can share your screen and talk about your bills.
All right. Thank you, Winton. And thank you so much for having us here and for dedicating this session to advocacy, which is just so near and dear to my heart. All right. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. All right, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, so at the Food Bank of Western Mass, we have a pretty long list of policy priorities. And some of them you've already heard Winton talk about: Healthy Incentives Program, the Mass Food Trust. You're also going to hear Pat Baker talk about the Hunger-Free Campus Initiative, and Leran from Project Bread talk about the Universal School Meals Bill. These are all things that we feel really strongly about and fight really hard to make sure that that they pass, that they're funded. And then in the past 5 years, we've also been adding more and more of the underlying causes of hunger to our policy priority list, because I feel like if we do our job really well, we will eliminate the need for food banks. I mean, food banks are supposed to be an emergency solution. They're not supposed to be the thing that happens all the time. So as we think about, well, what are the underlying causes of hunger, we've expanded to cover things like transportation, housing, living wage. And this legislation that I'm going to talk about today is about the cliff effect. And it's a legislation that was filed by Pat Duffy of Holyoke, Rep. Gonzalez, and Senator Lesser. It's called an Act Concerning Public Assistance for Working Families and the creation of a pilot program to address the impacts of the cliff effect. So that is a mouthful. So what is the cliff effect? Cliff effect is what happens when somebody is working and they take a new job or they're offered a raise, and the amount of money that they make, the new amount of money puts them just over the benefit limit for housing, for childcare, for SNAP, or whatever benefits that they're currently on. They lose the benefit, but the bump in income that they've gotten does not make up for the loss of the benefits. So they end up being worse off than they are. This is a huge problem. It impacts hundreds of thousands of people in the state. It really disproportionately impacts women, single moms, people of color, and people just get trapped in this cycle of poverty and low wages because they cannot afford to take a slightly higher paying job and lose their benefits. So where are these benefits? Where do they drop off? So somebody who's making $14 an hour, they are receiving housing assistance, childcare, SNAP, the earned income tax credit, and the mass tax credit. So that's a lot of benefits. They go up to $20 an hour, they lose their housing benefit. That right there is enough to stop a lot of people from taking that job, because if you know anything about the housing benefits, there are state benefits, there are federal benefits, all of them have a very, very long waiting list. It sometimes can take up to 20 years to get onto this list. Once you receive those housing benefits, you do not want to lose them. So the risk that people will take a job that may or may not last, you know, things happen with employment, jobs end. If you lose that housing benefit, really hard to get it back. At $22 an hour, you also lose your SNAP, and at $28, you lose everything except childcare. So what this legislation does is it creates a 3-year pilot program for working families, for 100 families throughout the Western Mass, mostly in Hampton County, but also some up in Hampshire and Franklin. It provides coaching, skills training, like actual, we have a large group of employers who we're working with who offer jobs, and then it removes the cliff benefit by using the mass earned income tax credit to close the gap. And I'll get into that a little bit more in the next slides. And then it also includes a savings component of up to $10,000 at the end of the 3-year program. So anybody who goes through this pilot will get a chunk of money at the end of it that they can use for whatever they need. So here's an example. Let's say there's a single mom. She's got 2 kids. They're both under the age of 8. She's at the beginning of the program, she's earning $14 an hour. So after taxes, her money from her job is $24,430. But with her benefits, housing, childcare, and food assistance, that those benefits are worth $28,500. So her total net worth, her total resources are $53,000 a year. But if she takes a new job at $20 an hour, her net salary goes up to $34,900, but she loses $8,000 in benefits, which make her net resources now $45,000. So she's basically, by taking that job, she's lost $8,000 worth of resources. So our bill would give her that $8,000 in earned income tax credit to make up the difference so that she can then take the job, advance in her career. And then once she's on that career path, her earnings will continue to go up, and it solves that problem in a very elegant way. So the reasons to pass this bill: creates a very solid foundation for people when they graduate the program because of the coaching, the financial coaching as well. They receive money if they complete the program. Gives them economic stability. And even though it's a pilot program, we've made it so that it's very easily scalable throughout the rest of the Commonwealth. We really think that this is something that could benefit so many people in the state. It encourages work, it rewards work. People don't want to just be on benefits for the rest of their lives. Most people want to be self-sufficient, and this is a way to get them there. And then businesses are just desperate right now for workers, and this really helps people be able to take jobs and earn a living wage. So I'm happy to answer more questions about this. It's a pretty meaty bill, and I know describing it in 3 minutes, there's probably going to be a lot of questions, so I'm happy to answer them. But if you want to join this effort, we have an Economic Pathways Coalition that we've started, and you can join that by emailing me. My email is here, and Winton will send it out as well. We've already had the hearing for this bill, happened at the end of September. It went really well. We're waiting to see, hopefully they report it favorably out of committee, but you can still submit written testimony. If you know somebody who's been in the situation of the cliff effect and they want to tell their story, if you've been in this situation, you want to tell your story, we really like to center people with lived experience in this movement and make sure that that they have a very strong voice within this coalition. And then most importantly, please, if you can ask your legislators to co-sponsor the bill, that would be great. That is it. Thank you. And Winton, I will turn it back over and stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Laura. Why don't you put your email address in the chat for folks who want to be able to reach out to you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Damon. Lisa is with Mass Farm to School, and she is going to talk about their bill. And Lisa, you can share your slides.
Great. Winton. Thanks. So like Winton said, I'm Lisa Damon from Massachusetts Farm to School. And Massachusetts Farm to School works in collaboration with Food Corps of Massachusetts to co-lead a coalition called Massachusetts Food for Massachusetts Kids. So Loose Coalition has been around for a number of years working on farm to school policy issues here at the state level, but just in the past 8 or so months, we solidified a formal coalition, and we're excited to continue working as part of a more formal coalition. We have about 25 or more diverse organizations from across the state working on these issues. And a lot of the issues that we support were talked about here today by the Senator and Winton as well. But we are primarily focusing right now on a farm to school grant bill that's currently in the legislature for consideration. We were fortunate enough to work with Senator Lesser and Representative Pignatelli to introduce a bill this session that would establish a formal farm to school grant bill within the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. The grant bill, the way it's read, would establish grants to fund infrastructure, training, and education programming in both public K-12 and also early education and care sites across the state. And eligible sites would be eligible if they participate in a federal meal program. And then the bill also includes language around prioritizing high need districts. So currently the bill to establish this grant program is within the committee on the Joint Committee on Education with a tentative hearing date of January 4th. So we are right now kind of in a similar state to some other bills. We're excited to start gathering and submitting written testimony. And then also we're excited to get folks together for that January 4th virtual hearing to present oral testimony. And so Massachusetts Farm to School through the coalition will be doing a lot of outreach over the coming weeks, probably trying to get things firmed up before the holidays in order to go into that January 4th after the new year into that testimony, into that hearing with a lot of energy. And then also, I just want to provide a little bit of an update, and the Senator mentioned this earlier in the appropriations bill, the COVID recovery appropriations bill that was passed last week. Massachusetts, the Farm to School grant program was fortunate enough to be allocated $1 million as part of that bill. So we're excited about that. Although it does not create permanent statute for the program, from what we understand, the funding can be spent over 5 years. And I know that staff at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education are already kind of underway thinking about, hopefully after the governor signs the bill soon, they're already underway thinking about how to kind of implement that program and hit the ground running so that we can use that as a jumpstart to the program to really prove the case for a more permanent program and the need that's there within districts and early education sites for this type of funding to support great work to expand programs or start programs in communities across the state. So, over the next couple of weeks, stay tuned. We'll be doing a lot of outreach to collect testimony, asking you to contact your legislators to co-sponsor the bills that are going to be considered on the 4th in the Joint Committee on Education. here is a one-stop shop for all things farm to school policy related here in Massachusetts. I'll share it in the chat so that you can click through, as well as my email. I'm happy to answer any questions on the farm to school grant bill or other farm to school related policies that you have questions about. And yeah, thanks for inviting me, Winton, to share a little bit about the bill today.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. And just in response to a few chat messages I've gotten, yes, we're a little over schedule, but there's a lot of important bills to talk about. So we're going to get through them, and we will still have the advocacy training session following the presentations. So next up is Leran from Project Bread, and Becca, if you could share our deck again.
Great. Thank you, Winton and Norris, Becca, and everyone at the Mass Food Systems Collaborative for inviting me. And thank you for everyone here who's involved in food systems issues. It's really great to be together on this. So I wanted to share a little bit about what Project Bread's been working on in terms of the Feed Kids Coalition and our campaign for school meals for all. But everyone who's speaking today, we support all the bills that are being mentioned wholeheartedly, and really excited to be part of this with great colleagues. So School Meals for All would ensure robust access so all students who may benefit from school breakfast or lunch are able to do so free from the barriers of cost and stigma. We know school meals have a big impact on food insecurity, but can also significantly improve health and education outcomes for students and their families. An act relative to universal school meals would require all schools in the Commonwealth to offer breakfast and lunch at no charge to all students who may need or want these meals regardless of household finances. In order to accomplish this, the bill directs the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to provide a supplemental reimbursement, ensuring that all meals are reimbursed at the federal free rate. Finally, this bill also requires the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the Department of Transitional Assistance, our state SNAP agency, to provide support and guidance so that all schools can engage in SNAP outreach. Beyond the benefits of SNAP to households, which is, I think most people know, but a cash assistance directed towards food purchases. SNAP enrollment also helps increase the share of the federal government would contribute to school meals in Massachusetts, bringing the overall cost of this bill down. In the first year of this campaign, we've had a lot of success. We currently have over half of both chambers of the legislature signed on as co-sponsors. We also have over 100 coalition partners, including representatives from anti-hunger, faith, business, healthcare, biotech, education, and youth empowerment organizations. And like the Farm to School bill, we have a hearing scheduled in the same hearing, January 4th. The Joint Committee of Education will be hearing both those bills. And we're gearing up to be a loud and vocal presence that day with our traditional action alerts, social media, and a strong set of testifiers on the day of the hearing. But we'd really love for you to join us to make sure that we're really amplifying that message. So the first easy thing you can do is on the screen there is to text Feed Kids, all one word, to 52886. That will allow you to do an action alert. And if you decide to keep that the checkboxes checked on that page, you'll receive additional opportunities from Project Bread in the future. And I also want to encourage you to consider joining our coalition. As I mentioned, we have over 100 members and it's quite diverse, but we're going to need a lot of support to be able to get this bold bill across the finish line. And I especially encourage you if you're more involved with agriculture or other food systems issues beyond food insecurity. First, we think this is just a really important piece of legislation, but second, we really think this is a food systems issue. Research and evaluations have shown that universal school meal programs, such as those implemented through the community eligibility provision, have allowed schools to increase revenue through greater participation, while decreasing their per meal cost through an economy of scale and by reducing the bureaucratic expectations and burdens on school nutrition programs. So School Meals for All could help unlock the full potential of school meal programs. We're providing the time and funds needed to invest in staff pay, purchasing equipment, doing staff trainings, and more directly, better sourcing. So the potential of investing in local sourcing or just better food sourcing in general. So we really encourage you to go to the website there, feedkidsma.org, to learn more, to join our coalition. I can put my email and that action alert as a link in the chat box, and happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Leran. Next up is Pat Baker, who, when she's not busy filing legislation, works for the Mass Law Reform Institute. Pat?
Thank you, Winton, and thanks to Senator Comerford, Rep. Kane, and everyone on this call today. First, I just want to echo what Senator Comerford said. We had a major victory this year with the signing of the Act to Promote School Nutrition, which essentially came out of a big report we did back in 2018 on school shaming practices around Massachusetts with 154 school districts. We work with Project Red to get that bill through, and it makes some improvements to the community eligibility provision, but more importantly, it basically says to school districts that are not giving universal school meals, you cannot put kids in the middle of school debt. You can't deny them meals, deny them extracurricular activities, and you can't use collection agencies because you can't add fees onto the meal debt, which I think will be an important pause for school districts to think seriously about maybe we should do universal school meals. So we are working with Project Red to support really the ultimate goal of feeding all kids in Massachusetts. And I also just want to share thanks to Senator Comerford and Rep. Kane being members of the Food Security Task Force with Winton and food banks and others. And I think what's come out of that in large part is more interagency collaboration. So that I think is going to be critical and important going ahead in 2020 and with the next governor as to how we continue the collaboration, particularly as we come out of, if we come out of COVID and the economic fallout of that. But people know me, I call this the Dr. Seuss campaign, which is the SNAP Gap Common App campaign. And we have been working on this for a number of years. It's actually provided an incredibly useful backdrop for what we've been doing with administrative advocacy with the state. You can flip back to the other one first. The SNAP Gap would bring in, oops, I'll just keep talking. The SNAP Gap would bring in probably $1.5 billion more in 100% food dollars into Massachusetts if we got everybody who's eligible for SNAP that's getting Mass Health right now onto the SNAP benefit. Massachusetts has really done a superb job, I think, compared to other states of increasing the SNAP caseload by 30% during COVID, but there's more people out there who should be getting this benefit. We do not believe that outsourcing this work to nonprofits is the way we're going to climb out of this gap and get this money into people's hands. As you also know, you can't get HIP without SNAP, so it complements that program immensely, and it also provides universal free school meals. Our bill was reported favorably out of the Joint Committee on Healthcare Finance. It is now in Ways and Means, and we are hoping to lock this in this year. Meanwhile, the Baker administration has taken some baby steps by putting a SNAP checkbox onto the paper Mass Health and Medicare Savings Program applications. And we're going to push really hard to get them to hardwire that into the Mass Health connector system. So here's information on the bill. We do have a coalition and we are really going to keep pushing this ahead. There'll be a report coming out this week or next that's further going to amplify the importance of the SNAP gap based on the Social Vulnerability Index, which is something the US Census tracks for base communities around the country in Massachusetts. The second campaign that I wanted to highlight is the next slide, the Hunger Free Campus campaign. And I know, I think Molly Kapner from Greater Boston was on the call earlier. I'm not sure if she's there, but Laura, Sylvester, myself, Gina Platanino from Central West Justice Center are all members of the Hunger Free Campus Coalition. We are thrilled that 2 pots of money were in the ARPA funding, and Senator Comerford highlighted one of them. There's 2.7 million for community colleges, but there's also 1 million specifically to kickstart a Hunger Free Campus initiative, which would include an Office of Capacity Building at Department of Higher Ed, and then really getting campuses to own and take charge of food insecurity on public college campuses and not-for-profit campuses that serve large numbers of low-income students. We're thrilled that Holyoke Community College recently created an EBT grocer on campus. There's studies that show that more students or more campuses that have grocers that accept EBT, more students enroll in SNAP because they connect the card with the food. And I think the more we can raise this issue among college campuses, particularly the community and state college campuses, I think we will see a sea change ensuring that students have access to not just SNAP, but other benefits, meal swipe programs, food cards, and the awareness is raised in that arena. I will put in the chat the link to the Hunger-Free Campus Coalition if people want to join that group, or reach out to me if you want to join the Common Apps campaign. That's it.
Thanks, Pat. And we are going to have time for questions for everybody after the final two presentations. So next up is Kristin Sukys, who's a policy analyst for the Center for Health Law and Policy Innovation at Harvard Law School. Kristin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Winton. My name is Kristin Sukys. As Winton said, I work for CHLP, the Center for Health Law and Policy Innovation of Harvard Law School. Really an honor to be here today with all of you, also just to work side by side with all of you to create a better food system. We're making change and things are happening, but always great to be surrounded by tireless advocates. So CHLP with Community Servings, as many of you know, we co-lead Food is Medicine Massachusetts, which is a coalition of about 80 to 90 organizations at this point, actually, in the state working to create a healthcare system that really recognizes and responds to the connection between health and food. So some of you have seen and have heard about the Food and Health pilot bill. Senator Julian Cyr and Representative Denise Garlick have reintroduced this bill and act relative to establishing a food and health pilot program. And this bill looks to strengthen the ability of the healthcare system to provide access to healthy and specifically medically tailored food for individuals with chronic conditions. So it would establish a pilot program that demonstrates the impact of offering a suite of medically tailored nutrition services for mass health enrollees diagnosed with very specific health conditions. The legislation, as mentioned, was reintroduced and it went to the Joint Committee of Public Health. And we actually already had a hearing on it in early October. So at the moment, the legislation is sitting with committee. So given the impact of diet-related chronic conditions on health, Food is Medicine Massachusetts really advocates that and believes that it's imperative of our healthcare system to not only reimburse for food and nutrition services that can address these conditions, but that the healthcare system has access to a spectrum of nutrition services that's available to meet individual nutritional needs. And we believe that healthcare providers should be prepared with systems in place to respond adequately to those individual nutritional needs too. So the Food and Health Pilot Program would require one healthcare facility to provide referrals to 3 types of medically tailored nutrition services: a medically tailored food program, medically tailored meal program, medically tailored food package program, and then a nutritious food referral program as well, similar to a produce prescription. To be eligible for the pilot, mass health enrollees must be food insecure and also need to be diagnosed with at least one health condition, which could include congestive heart failure, type 2 diabetes, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, renal disease, prediabetes, obesity, overweight, underweight, hypertension. As written right now, this legislation is fairly loose. And based on illness profile, qualifying participants will receive one of 3 medically tailored meal nutrition services for at least 3 weeks. So having access to the spectrum of those depending on their need. The legislation also states that Mass Health should determine the appropriate number of participants, that they may establish additional eligibility requirements for this pilot, and they also may extend services to members of the household too, because we know that food is shared at the household level. And because of this flexibility, there's currently no cost written into the legislation, though we've been working with experts and it depends on the pilot design, but this pilot could require up to $8 million to implement. And at the end of the pilot, Mass Health would be required to evaluate the impact of the pilot compared to control group on healthcare costs, emergency department utilization, hospital admissions, readmissions, pharmacy costs, and clinical and non-clinical outcomes, which could include blood pressure, hemoglobin A1C, cholesterol, mental health, quality of life indicators, as well as food insecurity too. So the legislation also calls for the creation of a food and health pilot research commission that will help Mass Health design and implement with design and implementation. The research commission would include representatives of state agencies, including the Office of Medicaid, Department of Public Health, Health Policy Commission, Elder Affairs, and MDAR. There's also additional seats that would be appointed by Mass Health, include diverse representation of other experts in the field and a wide variety of food system practitioners. So overall, there's about 3 goals of the pilot. One is to evaluate the impact of offering a suite of nutrition services on healthcare utilization and costs. 2, expand access to food as medicine interventions across Massachusetts. And 3, enhance the ability of our healthcare system to provide appropriate nutrition service based on patient need. So early successes of a flexible services program illustrate that providing these nutrition services to chronically ill patients is extremely impactful. This bill would allow the state to put a laser focus on the efficacy of these services and test the expansion of these services to additional high and rising risk populations. So honing in on the evaluation component well beyond flexible services, also expanding the populations that could be served by these services. So the pilot implementation and outcomes would also help inform broader changes that are critical to advancing the food as medicine system in our state. To truly build the system that Massachusetts deserves, we really need to increase this research. We need to provide resources to build new programs and initiate community clinical partnerships, improve the infrastructure supporting organizations looking to scale their food as medicine services, and create sustainable funding streams that are embedded in Mass Health payment structures. So this pilot is really just a critical first step to changing this broader system. So for more information about the bill, you can see foodasmedicinema.org, which I can put in the chat. You can find links to the bill text. You can also find a one-pager on the legislation. We also FEMA just submitted a written testimony as well that you can go ahead and read that as well. And then we encourage all of you to reach out. There's a link to join the coalition to get on the mailing list where we send advocacy opportunities. You can also email me. I'll put my email in the chat too, or my colleague Hannah Sobel, as well as community servings. So thank you so much. I'm happy to take any questions, and I know that we're already over a little bit. So
we'll do questions after one more presentation. Thank you, Kristin. Marty from NOFA, you are up next.
All right, wonderful. Hello, friends. It's really a pleasure to be with you all, to follow Senator Comerford and to join this symbolic stage with so many of my distinguished allies in this workshop, and to connect with you all certainly goes without saying, but I look forward to doing this in person whenever we can do that safely. Introduce myself. My name's Marty Dagoberto, he, him pronouns. I am calling in from the ancestral lands of the Pecumtuck, Nipmuc, and Abenaki in present-day Franklin County, and I'm the policy director for the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Massachusetts, NOFA Mass. For those who don't know, we're a statewide network of gardeners, farmers, growers, landscapers, foodies, and food activists who work together through education and advocacy to increase the production and availability of nutrient-dense food and the cultivation of healthy living landscapes coming from living soil for the health of our communities and our planet. And, you know, as conveners of the organic gardening and farming movement, we certainly have a number of assorted intersecting policy interests. And I just wanted to share with you all in the couple minutes I have here, a few of our top priorities. So in addition to continued advocacy to fund the Healthy Soils programs, and we're really grateful to be working with Senator Comerford and Rep. Schmidt as our Healthy Soils legislative champions on that. Really excited about getting Healthy Soils recognized as ecological infrastructure in the ARPA bill, and we're certainly looking forward to working with American Farmland Trust and many of you to get more funding in the fiscal year 23 budget. But as far as bills that are left this session, we want to hold up the food justice bills as proud members of the Mass Renews Alliance, formerly Mass Green New Deal. We want to support the food justice platform that they're putting forward. Two interrelated bills, one relative to establishing food justice frontline would fund nonprofit organizations to hire individuals living in frontline food insecure communities, getting them well compensated food security jobs. As we heard in previous presentations, leveraging local connections for the most efficient and effective solutions for to meet local food security needs. And then related to that, an act relative to food justice with jobs would create community land trusts in food insecure communities so that they can grow more food, create food security jobs, and it actually includes soil health as a provision for what it means to have a community agriculture standards. You've already heard plenty about Senator Comerford's Ag Omnibus bill. There's just so many important improvements to support that we've been in support of for several sessions, and hoping that this is the year to move through that package, if anything else. We have a hearing coming up on Tuesday on our pesticide related bills. The next hearing in NRA, 1 p.m. on Tuesday, will cover over 20 or so pesticide reform bills that we've been tracking. And I just wanted to take a minute to highlight a few of our top priority ones. We want to focus on improvements that are rather than playing whack-a-mole with whatever the most terrible pesticide is that we're concerned about. We want to see systemic improvements to how pesticides are regulated in Massachusetts, to see more democratic approach and transparent approach to reducing pesticides use and exposure in our food system and in our landscapes. And as a top priority, we're pushing Rep. Gentile's bill H926 to improve pesticide protections for children. This would limit what can be sprayed on playgrounds where associated with schools to those pesticides which are considered minimum risk by the EPA, or things that are appropriate for organic agriculture. Similar to that, we want to have, again, a systemic improvement on pesticides reduction. The case of the bald eagles recently succumbing to poisoning by consuming poisoned rats, these second generation anticoagulants, rodenticides, which that's a whole mouthful, I'm just learning to say, really highlights the need to promote integrated pest management on all our public lands, and to modernize how we track the use and application, and how it's being used, where it's being used, what pesticides are being used. Currently, things are largely analog. It's hard to have a baseline to work from to reduce pesticides if we don't really know how and where it's being used. So this bill would digitize pesticide reporting for the state. And finally, the mosquito spray issue, certainly it also relates to our food system, in that right now our certified organic farmers are able to exempt from aerial and broadcast spraying for mosquitoes, but our other farm, non-organic farms and gardeners don't have such protections. And we're working with a coalition of groups to support a mosquito management system that replaces the current outdated and expensive system with one that's more effective, more affordable, transparent, ecologically responsible, and based in science. And we want to, in that regard, we want to support our ability to produce our food in our gardens and our farms, and to address the concerns around aerial spraying. And yeah, let's close with giving a plug for a roundtable discussion we're going to have at the NOFA Mass Winter Conference with the collaborative here, American Farmland Trust, CISA, and the Urban Farming Institute on Sunday the 16th, really to have a conversation about how we can hold up farmers' voices in climate policy and action. How can we work together as advocates to provide a platform for the voices of farmers to be at the table in the climate conversation. I know that was a lot, but if you have any questions, feel free to connect. I'd be more than happy to build with you on these issues. You got my email there, but I'll paste it in the chat as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marty, for all your good work and for that presentation. So we've taken a lot of time for the bills, and I know folks want to get to the workshop, but I want to give folks a few minutes if you have any questions that you haven't posted in the chat yet for any of the advocates that you've heard from about any of the bills. Please raise your hand or put them in the chat, or take yourself off mute. Or if there are no questions, if folks feel more comfortable reaching out to people one-on-one. Oh. Thank you for that, John. Not a question, but appreciate that. Any other questions? Seeing none, you've all got email addresses for everyone, so please do feel free to reach out. I want to move on to our second half, if we can still call it a half. The last bit of our session here is going to be a workshop with Barbara L'Italian. This is a chance for us to hone our skills on how we're going to actually move all of these great pieces of legislation. Barbara was a 4-term representative in the Massachusetts House and a 2-term senator. She's also spent a lot of time on our side of the table, as well as an advocate and as a lobbyist for healthcare issues. And with that range of experience, she's going to talk to us a bit about some of the keys to being more effective advocates. So I'll turn it over to you, Barbara.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to start by saying you've had a lot of information thrown at you. I'm going to take this back down to its simplest form first and then kind of vault back up. But as Winton mentioned, there's a lot of, bills pending, opportunities for funding, et cetera, that have all been shown to you. But how do you take that information? How do you take those opportunities and make the most of them? I would posit that the first step, and I know there's a range of people on this call, some are very, very skilled, some are just beginning, but I would posit that the first and most elemental step is to figure out why you're on this call today. Do you work for an organization? Have you experienced hunger yourself? Are you a farmer struggling to make your way? Why are you here? And when you figure out what that connection is, that becomes the beginning of your story, right? Of your ability to connect with your legislators. And right now, December is a fine time to connect with legislators and their staff or their staff. To share your experiences. So in the ideal situation, people are connecting with their legislators by phone call, Zoom call, if any are doing office hours right now, but connecting with people in December, which is a relatively quiet time. There are some hearings, but if you haven't already, introduce yourself, explain why you care about food system issues, and really begin the process of having a relationship with your legislators. I was astounded when I worked for the ARC of Massachusetts and had to go all over the state and train people in advocacy that many families of, in that instance, disabled folks had no idea who the legislators were, didn't know the process, knew that they wanted things, but didn't know how to explain it. So it really starts with making that outreach to the legislator. And explaining to them who you are, really trying to get to know who they are. And it sounds like with 153 as part of the caucus, everyone pretty universally understands that this is an issue, right? But we want to push for more than that. We can't be afraid not to push for more than just signing on to a caucus and co-sponsoring some stuff. So you want to really set yourself up as an expert, right? Either through lived experience, or with the work that you're doing at a food bank, or whatever it is you're doing. You want to kind of take a combination of the data points that coalitions like Matt's Food System can provide for you, Project Bread, Greater Boston Food Bank, and others. Take those data points, but make them real with stories, right? And those stories can be put together in a way that doesn't betray anyone's, rights and privacy, but you can certainly create composite stories that are compelling to make your point for why something is needed. I think that's critically important. I love that Project Bread has this quick text thing, and everyone sends out canned emails out through coalitions to send to their legislators. But I will tell you, nothing impacts better than a personal email, a personal, check-in on why you were supporting something and painting a picture on what that is. Once you've laid that groundwork and you have that working relationship with your legislators, then I think texting is perfectly fine. Those canned texts are fine. But the critical step that can't be missed is setting up that relationship, okay? Too many people, in my experience, having spent 12 years as a legislator and in the building, you know, working for Treasurer Grossman, too many people, you know, in the old days pre-COVID would come in, and I would call it storming the castle. Right before budget or in reaction to a budget release that wasn't favorable, right? If you've done that, you've missed the idea that advocacy is a year-round endeavor. And wherever you get on is fine, but you want to start the process and you want to continue the process, okay? That can also extend beyond your own legislators, although of course, explaining to them in great detail how these issues impact their district means that you're going to have a better chance of them promoting and pushing for something, because there are levels of support. You can join a caucus, you know, that's great. The next step would be signing, co-sponsoring legislation. That's great. The next step is really getting them to testify at bill hearings. You know, and the next step is when critical decisions are being made by the relevant committees, be it the Agricultural Committee, Public Health, Ways and Means, that you want your legislators to really push. You want them to really reach up right into the leadership to try to advocate for what's needed. You know, be it at a budget time, you know, a budget push, or be it for legislation. And let's remember, right, we are on the clock now for legislation. Next year is year 2 of a 2-year cycle. Bills will have to come out of committee for the most part by the second week in February, unless if they get an extension, if they are not reported out favorably, they are in essence done for this session. So right now, again, there is an urgency to checking in with folks on your legislators on the bills that you care about. So all those great experts, Pat Baker and you know, the woman from the Western Mass Food Bank and everybody else that just presented the really intriguing stuff out of Harvard around, do we want to bring down the cost of healthcare by feeding people, feeding them food that's going to keep them healthy, right? You know, they've got the data points, they've got all that stuff they can share with you, but you are unique messengers and you can take that data and meld it and make it your own, okay? When I entered the legislature, I had 2 things that really motivated me. I had an autistic son and there was no autism framework in this state. And I'd worked in the world of seniors and elder care. And I took both of those and ran with them and really tried to become a champion. If we have champions within our legislature, and we know we do, I can think of Sal on the, you know, on the food, you know, school meals for all. There's so many, Jo Comerford, I mean, so many great people. You know, we want to help them. We want to help elevate them by giving them good information and compelling stories as well. So that's kind of at its essence, I would say, really important work. We also know, as I said, that we deal with a legislature that is set up by committee. So, you know, you do want to also reach out beyond your own legislators to the leaders of the relevant committees where your bills are sitting. And you really want, again, once you know you've got a legislator on board, you want to check in with them on a regular basis and you want to ask them to weigh in and weigh up on things, okay? Joining coalitions, something that Jo Comerford talked about earlier, is so important for a whole bunch of these issues that may seem to be in the minds of a legislator small and isolated. Connecting them together, the power of coalitions is incredibly important. So if you are here today, but you've never joined a coalition, you want to be directed into a coalition and you want to be a part of that as well. Other things, you know, using social media can be fine as far as weighing in. You know, a lot of the organizations make it easier for you to do that. You know, but I think the most important thing is really connecting and giving good information. One of the concerns I have that was talked about earlier in the ARPA bill is sometimes if we put too much of a focus on the individual districts, what you end up getting is more money going into earmarks for that particular district, but not serving the larger, broader goals. So that's why sort of, directing your legislators to kind of support the bigger, broader, overarching goals, I think can be incredibly important as well. But I know at times that can be a challenge. So we know we have another bite at the apple with ARPA. I would suggest that that work is beginning now. In terms of, we know they're going to take that up at sometime early next year. There's a substantial amount of money still there. Being part of the messaging that comes down from the coalitions that might perhaps in this next tranche include, asking for more money towards the bigger, broader, overarching goals. That might be something to pay attention to and tune into with Winton. Having served in the House and the Senate, sometimes it was easier to get earmarks than it was to get bigger, broader. Although I'm a big believer in bigger and broader, raises all ships. So I think that that's better. But we have another bite there with additional ARPA funding. Sometimes if there's a lobbyist involved with a given issue, connecting with them as well can be critically important. Learning from them and their expertise. I just worked on the public health funding stuff for the last year, and it was actually really fun kind of connecting back into legislative offices and making sure they understood exactly what was needed and trying to, get that done and trying to break through. Let's see, it's 11:38. I don't know if there's other stuff, Winton, you'd like me to cover, or if you want to jump in, and then sometimes the questions can be a whole lot more interesting and can help people learn. But if I have nothing else to say, get to know your legislators, do it now. In my mind, what was successful for me was taking all these wonderful researchers, policy and data points, but making it real. Right? And learning to negotiate the politics inside the building as well, and getting to as many people as possible. And that can be outside in pressure from coalitions. That can also be bottom up from our legislators that we know are our champions, and having a number of them make their way up and really actively work with leadership. And then also it's sometimes engaging in a top-down approach of really trying to engage the key decision makers in the legislature, which are the Senate president, the Ways and Means chairs, and the speaker. So I'll kick it back over, unless if Winton thinks I've overlooked something and he wants me to mention it.
Have you got a particular moment that you remember from when you were in the building where an advocate came to you, maybe an issue you didn't know anything about before, that really was effective and particularly struck you and turned you on to an issue? Just as an example of what good advocacy looks like from that side of the table.
Yeah, early on, I would say I worked with a woman named Julia Landau at Mass Advocates for Children based in Boston. And she really had her finger on the pulse of what was going on, most importantly with the implementation of bills that have been passed, which I would argue is going to be critical for next year, right? There's going to be money, but making sure that that money is implemented as intended is important. But she also had a lot of really great information that came in from families who were struggling with special needs to get what they needed out of the education system and out of the federal law as well as the state law. So having all those great examples of where things were struggling, we would put our heads together and figure out policy and legislation that we would file to try to address issues. So, critical is having someone that you trust that's going to give you honest and good information. I think that's critical. Mass law reform is known for giving great information, right? There are just certain groups that are just known for giving you really good, strong information, right? They're not selling you on something, they're sharing very compelling information. And then sort of taking those concerns and kind of melding them into good policy equates into filing good legislation. But here you've already got all that legislation filed. So I think for those who are new to the process, it's going back and looking at a couple of these bills that really intrigued you and figuring out how you can plug in, right? Through the presenter, through whatever coalition they may have, through going back. And even if you've already talked to your legislator, mentioning this particular piece of legislation. I think what ends up happening, and Jo Comerford talked about this a little bit, is sometimes people feel issues like hunger are so overwhelming that they don't know where to begin, or they fear that it's going to break the bank, right? So critical in all of this as well is all of these things that are going to amount to pilot programs or even the ARPA funding. It's collecting that data on results and being able to kind of play a simultaneous, we know we've got 5 years of ARPA funding on some things, but we need funding in the out years, right? In the annual budgets. It's kind of collecting that data on what works, being honest about the costs, but also talking about the cost of not doing, right? The cost of not taking care of people, the cost of not, indexing qualification for benefits so people don't fall off a cliff, right? Every time the minimum wage goes up or something like that. So I think it's as critical to, have your facts, to break it down into workable chunks for legislators who can sometimes find issues to be overwhelming. But to have your data, and these, certainly some of these pilot programs will provide data, as well as all the other data you've amassed over the years in doing this great work.
Thanks. I mean, you covered a lot of the topics I was going to cover, so that was good, even though we didn't coordinate all that much. There's a few points I want to raise, and feel free to jump in if you think I'm misstating something. One of the things that I tend to talk to people about is around relationship building. And I try to frame it that you're doing legislators a favor. You're connecting them to important issues that they're going to get credit for supporting. And so I think telling advocates that really does help them get over some of maybe an initial fear or concern, in that you're turning the tables in some ways. The other thing is that advocacy really does work both ways. Legislators are going to want to get to know you and get to know who you work with, what kinds of issues you're knowledgeable about, because they're going to come to you at times, and they're going to come to you as an advocate and ask you how they should be considering an issue, or ask you for support on a bill that they filed. And so you have to really think about that as a two-way relationship, not just that you're always going to them to ask, although you should never hesitate to go to them to ask.
That's absolutely correct. It's a two-way street. And in the ideal, if you've established yourself as a subject matter expert through work experience, lived experience, that's absolutely true. The people that do the best in the building are those that have those two-way relationships. And you can see it in Senator Comerford, right? She's reaching out, she's learning from all of you, she's taking that information you have, and she was continuing this morning to encourage people to do that free flow of information back and forth, because you guys are the experts on this issue and the legislators are not.
And you raised this, but I want to emphasize it as well, is that it's not about getting people to vote right. Most votes in the legislature end up being unanimous. It's not about the vote. It's not even about whether or not your legislator will co-sponsor something. It's about turning them into champions for the issue. You want to get them to be doing the work that you can't. As an advocate, it's very hard for you to reach out to 200 different legislators and get all of them to listen to you. But when you've got a handful of really good legislative champions who you've educated, who can talk about it as if they were an advocate, that makes your job so much easier. And that's what's happened with the Food System Caucus, for instance. Those folks who've gotten to the chairs of the Food System Caucus and really made their voices heard there, those 6 chairs have amplified those voices throughout the building. So I think that's really important, that don't walk away once your legislator says, yes, I'm going to vote for it, or yes, I'm going to co-sponsor it. That's really just the beginning of the conversation. Pat Baker, I know you had a question you wanted to throw out there. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Barbara. It's lovely to see you, and all your advice is spot on. I have like two quick questions. One is, COVID's really changed how we relate and build relationships. And what do you feel has been the most effective strategies during COVID for people to really reach legislators when they can't easily meet in person and social gatherings. And second, a lot of questions I get all the time is, what if they ask me a question I don't know the answer to? What if they ask me, well, how, where are you going to get the money from, or where is the bill? And how do you advise? Because people are scared to do legislative work when they feel like they're going to be asked a trick question, or not trick, but a question they don't know the answer to.
Yeah, I mean, I think COVID has made some things easier and some things more challenging as far as how you connect with your legislators. I don't know if any of them do in-person office hours right now. I suspect very few do. On the one hand, because to me, there's nothing easier than if they had posted office hours, showing up, meeting them, at those. And/or I used to, suggest to people that they set up a time to meet for coffee with their legislator, right? So those things for the moment, probably not happening very much. But on the other hand, if you can get a Zoom meeting, the legislator can have that many more meetings with people. It's far more efficient for both parties because there's not travel time involved, right? And so, going to Zoom or to Teams or to WebEx in the case of the, the governor's office and their folks, it is very convenient. You can get an awful lot more meetings in. So the tough part, I think, what I've experienced over the last couple of months in pushing on the public health, the local public health funding, and interestingly enough, the two of the champions on the local public health stuff are also Hannah Kane and Jo Comerford. So they clearly see the connection between, public health and food, right? So it's tougher because a lot of people aren't in the building. So you go through this, you try to call and you leave a message and maybe people get back to you. You email, people do get back to you when you email them, but sometimes people's email boxes can be flooded, right? During the rise and fall of things like budget amendments being filed or bills being put out or whatever. So that's been a little challenging, but what I did was, for myself, I just set up a grid of everybody and began learning who were the staff people, what were the phone numbers, what were their preferred numbers if they had a cell instead, since so many people are working off site. So I think the challenge first is trying to get through either through phone or, a message at the State House or through email. But then, it's also really critically important to build a relationship with the staff. Right? The staff are particularly in the House, the staff are the eyes and ears for the rank and file members. Oftentimes they have one staff person. I had one staff person for the first 6 years in the House. What did I do? I had college and high school interns that came in and helped me out, and folks from Simmons College and whatever, but I had one staff person. So, getting to know the staff and in the Senate, getting to know who's the appropriate staff, or if it's a chair in the House, who's the right person to reach out to, right? Who's part of the committee staff, who are the district staff? Those are really important as well. But I think once you break through and begin building that relationship with the legislator, building it with the staff is okay too, because they're also reporting back and they're also making, recommendations to their legislators based on what they've learned, right? Oftentimes they used to be the ones that would attend the meetings that were being held in the building, on bill signing days and teach-ins and all of that. When you don't have the answer to a question, a specific question on how you're going to pay for it, I wouldn't make anything up. Like, I worked for Steve Grossman, his cardinal rule was always, don't make stuff up if you don't know the answer. Be honest that you don't have the answer. I think you can reframe some of the funding around, at least for now, that there are lots of funding opportunities, right? That there is still ARPA money coming down from the feds. There will be, in some instances, Build Back Better money. There's monies that can come down from some of the federal money that's going to go directly to the relevant cabinet secretaries for housing, USDA, whatever, that it would then be incumbent on the state agencies to apply for, right, to put out as grants or whatever. So I would turn it around with them and say, I don't have all the answers on how we fund this, but can you agree that this is an issue worth working on, worth putting our heads together, worth working with you know, the advocacy world, the coalitions, legislative leadership. You don't have to have all the answers to pick up the phone and call somebody. You just don't. It's the start of a relationship. They know there aren't quick and easy answers on some of these things, or they'd have already solved for it. But don't ever let "we don't have enough money" be the end of a conversation. You know, when I pushed for autism, a medical mandate for autism for kids, my biggest fear was that people were going to make the cost be the end of the story rather than the beginning of the story. And so, you know, really focused on trying to get good financial information from other states that have already done this work, and went through CHIA and really, you know, tried to, again, talk about the cost of doing nothing. What is the cost of doing nothing for these families? You know, what is the cost of doing nothing? You know, on all these issues we just talked about. And so that's the way I look at it, Pat. I know people think it can be intimidating, but on the other hand, a lot of typical constituents think every legislator knows everything about everything, and they don't. So, you know, changing the equation so that you are seen as an information source that can give good information that can help your legislators, particularly the new ones. You know, there's been a lot of turnover in the last couple of sessions, and, you know, getting to know them and find out what motivated them to run for office and what are their issues, and potentially grooming some of them to be champions as well, to back up our longstanding champions. Those are all things that I think are critically important as well.
Thank you so much. I 100% agree with you. I just say to people, look, be honest, as you say, I don't know the answer. It's a really good question. I'll try and get the answer, but here's why I'm here. Here's what I can share with you, and turn it back. And I just really appreciate that, because I feel that that is the one thing that creates some people are scared to do legislative work because they think they have to know everything, but they know what they feel, they know what they've experienced, they know what they did in their lives. And that's really what gets at the hearts of the legislators. So you just are such an expert, which is why you're such a fabulous legislator and a fabulous advisor now. So thank you. And there's so many groups on this call who will help people get the data or answers.
Right, that's right. But the individual power is in people's personal stories of what they've experienced for hunger, or what they've seen, you know, in the work they're doing. Those are things that are critically important. And, you know, I used to laugh when I would train on advocacy. It was one group in particular that would always rely on canned emails. And I would always go back to their director and say, you know, instead of a laundry list of canned email, ask your folks to take a minute, pick a couple of items on that laundry list, and just reflect personally on why it's important to them, why failure to act to change this is going to be a problem, or whatever it may be, rather than trying to do the laundry list. I think that's more impactful personally. And again, once you've reached that relationship with your legislators, sure, it's great and easy to text and send these different things out. I mean, I did it a little bit during budget session this year on some of the food stuff and some of the homeless stuff. But I have those relationships already with the legislators. And I can't even tell you how many of them would come back and say, thank you for bringing this to my attention. Like, there's a zillion amendments on ARPA, a zillion amendments on the annual budget. Thank you for highlighting this. And they'll do that with everybody if you take the time to highlight something that's really critically important. One last thing, I know people didn't get everything they wanted in ARPA, but it's also important to go back and thank people. You know, in our public health, we got 4/5 of what we were looking for. Like, I immediately went back and thanked all the people I met with, all the people I talked to. You know, legislators tend to hear from people when things are going wrong and when people need something. And that's important, and that's valid, and that's their job. But don't ever forget to thank your champions, leadership, the chairs, the committees, you know, your legislators. Like, that's important as well. People will remember that if you've taken the time to thank them.
That sort of connects with something that I'm curious your thoughts on. One of my strategies, and I've heard other advocates and lobbyists say this as well, is there's exceptions to every rule, but to try to not oppose something, try to not go to a legislator and say, this is terrible, you shouldn't have filed this, don't, but that turn it around. Thank you very much for raising the issue of kids' lunches in schools. I really appreciate you filing this bill that say kids shouldn't get any fruit. And I would be happy to support this bill with a small change that says kids should always get fruit. And so that you're giving them constructive help. You're saying, here's how I can become a supporter of you, because that's a legislator you may need to go to for something else a little bit further down the line. Just sort of curious, if, you have this image of, going after, you never want to go after anybody, but, really coming down hard and saying, we need to fight this back. And then having a hard time with relationships in the future. How do you walk that line?
Yeah, I mean, I used to always look at it this way, right? Someone who doesn't agree with me on a given issue right now might be the exact person I need on an issue in the future. So you never want to burn bridges, right? Over the years, I've seen some of the smartest, most dedicated legislators burn out and leave because they tried to do a full-on take no prisoners approach. And when that doesn't work, and they're not able to be successful, they end up leaving in frustration. So with really few exceptions, I can count on one hand some of the legislators over the last 10 years that I would really, have a tough time with. You always need to be trying to work with them, educate them, and inform them. You may not change their mind, but using the opportunity to explain why you disagree on something in a nice way and sharing your perspective, I think is critical, right? And so they view you as someone that's going to be an honest soundboard with them, even when you disagree. Sometimes what happens in life, and it certainly can happen in the legislature, the higher up people get, they tend to get surrounded by folks that only tell them what they want to hear. And I always took value in the counsel of people who would give me the unvarnished truth on how they felt about things, and whether something was going well or not. I liked that feedback, there's always something that you can find that you can common ground with people. And then you try to find that and work your way out from there. And I had to do this, like some of you know the name Jim Lyons, but he, beat me out from my state rep seat in 2010 when I was the vice chair of Ways and Means. And then I came back and had to be the senator and share a district with him. And that was not easy because we couldn't be more polar opposite in terms of our political ideology, philosophy, etc. I still had to work with the guy. I still had to meet with him and I had to come up with common ground. And there were things that we worked on together. So it can be done. And that's the way of doing it. But you never want to call someone out publicly on a bill. You never want to make it a personal attack. I know we see that all the time in DC. But I still feel like here, there's still a lot of collaboration and a lot of willingness to work together and a lot that goes on behind the scenes, So yeah, you never want to publicly put somebody in a box because you never know when you could need them on a future issue, or if you really set them off on your issues, are they going to try behind the scenes to thwart whatever work you're trying to do? So you really are playing a long game on all of this, right? And really trying to convert people little by little over to what you're working on and what you need done.
Thanks for that, Barbara. Thanks for all of this. I recognize that it's noon and we're starting to lose people who have other commitments or lunch or just a 2-hour Zoom is enough. And I certainly understand that, but thank you so much, Barbara, for your time. I hope this has been useful to folks. I want to point out there's some resources on the Collaborative's website that provide all kinds of tips and tricks around advocacy. There's a full manual for campaigns, as well as a simple one-pager that talks about the kinds of relationships building that we've been talking about in this session. I think the link's in the chat somewhere, but we can put it in again. So I'd encourage you to take a look at those resources. And then finally, I did put a link in the chat that there are a few more sessions left of the forum. Please take a look at our website, mafoodsystem.org, or again, the link in the chat, and join us for this afternoon session on balancing emergency response and systemic solutions to food insecurity, or 2 more sessions tomorrow. And with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you again, everybody.